Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. President Joe Biden announces he's running for a second term, releasing a video saying the question we are facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. This is not the time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for reelection. And he says he wants 4 more years to finish the job. Democrat Joe Biden could face a rematch against Republican former President Donald Trump, who's also a candidate for president in 2024. And he put out his own video today, calling President Biden worse than the 5 worst presidents in American history put together. A House Republican bill that would raise the national debt limit to avoid a default later this year and also cut federal spending, moving a step closer to passage, going before the House Rules Committee today to set the rules for floor debate this week. But still some questions about whether enough House Republicans would vote for it to get it passed, assuming no House Democrats support it. We'll talk about that with Congressional Reporter with The Hill, Aris Folley. President Biden officially issuing a veto threat against that House Republican plan for raising the debt ceiling and cutting spending, calling it hostage-taking. We'll also have the latest on the fighting in Sudan's capital between the 2 military generals looking to control that country. And 75th anniversary of Israeli independence. We'll hear from Israel's prime minister and a member of Congress supporting a resolution on U.S.-Israeli relations and the U.S.-backed Abraham Accords that normalize relations between Israel and some Arab neighbors. This from the New York Times. President Joe Biden formally announced on Tuesday that he would seek a second term, arguing that American democracy still faces a profound threat from former President Donald J. Trump, as he set up the possibility of a climactic rematch between the two next year. In a video that opens with images of a mob of Trump supporters storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021, the president said that the fight for our democracy has been the work of my first term, but is incomplete while his predecessor mounts a comeback campaign for his old office that Mr. Biden suggested would endanger fundamental rights. That from the New York Times. Here is that video. It runs 3 minutes.
Freedom. Personal freedom is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term, to fight for our democracy.
This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it. But you know, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote. When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election, because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity. That we're a nation where we give hate no safe harbor. We believe that everyone is equal, that everyone should be given a fair shot to succeed in this country.
Thank you for choosing us.
Every generation of Americans has faced a moment when they have to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights. And this is our moment.
We, the people, will not decide. God love you.
So if you're with me, go to joebiden.com and sign up. Let's finish this job. I know we can, because this is the United States of America. There's nothing, simply nothing we cannot do if we do it together.
President Biden's video announcing his reelection campaign released this morning, exactly 4 years after he announced his campaign against then President Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump, who is running again for the Republican presidential nomination 2024, putting out a video of his own today in response to President Biden's video. Here's the last minute of that.
With such a calamitous and failed presidency, it is almost inconceivable that Biden would even think of running for re-election. You know what happened in the last election? They cheated and they rigged the election. But I promise you this, when I stand on that debate stage and compare our records, it will be radical Democrats' worst nightmare, because there's never been a record as bad as they have. And our country has never been through so much. There has never been a greater contrast between two successive administrations in all of American history, ours being greatness and theirs being failure. With your support in the election, we will defeat Joe Biden in 2024. We will rescue our economy. We will crush inflation. We will stop the invasion on our southern border. We will restore our nation's dignity, and we will prevent World War III from happening. Together, we will all make America great again.
Former President Donald Trump, 2024 Republican presidential candidate, posting that video on his Truth Social platform. Republican National Committee responding to President Biden's re-election announcement video with a 30-second ad that was created with artificial intelligence, audio and video, depicting what a Joe Biden second term might look and sound like.
We can now call the 2024 presidential race for Joe Biden.
My fellow Americans.
This morning, an emboldened China invades Taiwan. Financial markets are in free fall as 500 regional banks have shuttered their doors.
Border agents were overrun by a surge of 80,000 illegals yesterday evening.
Officials closed the city of San Francisco this morning, citing the escalating crime and fentanyl crisis.
Who's in charge here? It feels like the train is coming off the track.
A Republican National Committee ad posted today created with AI. Former President Trump also suggesting today he may not attend the Republican primary debates. There have been 2 scheduled so far. The president writing, "When you're leading by seemingly insurmountable numbers and you have hostile networks with angry Trump and MAGA-hating anchors asking the questions, why subject yourself to being libeled and abused?" He also wrote this. Also, the second debate is being held at the Reagan Library, the chairman of which is, amazingly, Fred Ryan, publisher of the Washington Post. No. The Democratic Party has decided not to hold any primary debates this year. President Biden does have a few announced Democratic challengers for the nomination, including author Marianne Williamson, who was on the New York City-based radio program The Breakfast Club this morning.
What did you see in Biden's campaign that says there are some flaws and this is the reason why I want to run? What's not making you satisfied?
It's an incremental approach. It's a lack of fundamental economic reform. It's taking an unjust economic system and saying to people, I will try to help you survive an unjust economic system. But in the richest country in the world, why should the economic system be unjust? Mm-hmm. You have 20% of Americans for whom the economy is pretty good. Mm-hmm. But this 20% live on some kind of enchanted economic island surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. 39% of Americans now report that they have skipped meals to pay their rent. Mm-hmm. That's 44% of millennials. We have 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt. Mm-hmm. 64% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And 60% of Americans could not afford an unexpected $400 expenditure. So no, things are not okay. Mm-hmm. So the president saying, well, things are okay, I'm going to finish the job. What job? Every other advanced democracy has universal health care, free college tuition, free child care, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, and a guaranteed livable wage. We need an economic U-turn in this country. We don't need more little fixes here. Oh, look what I've done for you. Maybe you can survive this. People's lives are falling apart. Mm-hmm. We call it a mental health crisis, but they don't want to look at the deeper systemic causes of all this despair that is literally killing people.
Mm. Do you think that President Biden is too old to run again?
I wouldn't go there. I mean, everybody can see what they see, make their own decisions. I'm not a young woman. I'm 70. I would not be running if I were 80. But at the same time, I don't want to take pot shots, and I don't think the American people don't need me to weigh in on that.
Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson on the Breakfast Club radio show on WWPR-FM in New York City, simulcast on the TV station BET. Another Democratic presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., tweeting, "I have known and liked Joe Biden for many years, but we differ profoundly on fundamental issues such as corporate influence in government, censorship, civil liberties, poverty, corruption, and war policy, among others. I look forward to engaging him in debates and town hall meetings in a primary election that is honest, civil, and transparent. I invite him into a new era of respectful dialogue in these times of division. Hashtag Kennedy 24. At the White House, the press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre saying again today that federal law will limit her ability to answer certain questions that are campaign-related. She did get a question today about the president's age.
The issue of the president is 80 years old, oldest man ever elected, would be 86 at the end of his second term. Our CBS News poll this morning shows that only 22% of Democratic-leaning voters are excited about the prospect of President Biden running for re-election. I want to ask you this. As a young man, when he was coming of age, the president who was inaugurated in 1961 said that it was time that a torch had been passed to a new generation. Why has President Biden not decided to pass the torch at this point? Why does he still want to hold it?
So a couple of things. I want to be very careful. Again, this is the 2024, related to the 2024 re-election, so I want to be very careful on that piece. But what I can say more broadly is that, as it relates to your first part of the question, when it comes to age, it's the same thing that we heard in 2020. Right? We heard that over and over in 2020. And if you look at what the president has done this past 2 years, he's been able to deliver and get things done, right? Where Republicans in Congress, Republicans on the other side of Pennsylvania are trying to pull us back, not move us forward. And again, I talked about negotiating, Medicare being able to negotiate. I talked about the infrastructure legislation. The Chips and Science Act, making sure that we're competitive against China and bringing manufacturing jobs here, which we have seen. 800,000 manufacturing jobs have been created under this president. So there is a host of accomplishments that this president has been able to do, and that Republicans in Congress have not. They literally have not been able to get things done. And so I want to be very clear about that. As it relates to the polls, again, mindful of the 2024 election, and we understand what the polls are saying. I will say this, in 2022, let's not forget, more Americans voted for this president than any other president in history. And let's not forget, in 2022, the midterms election, against all odds, right? Against everything that we were being told, that this president had one of the most successful midterm elections for a Democratic president in 60 years. And we were able to stop that red wave. That did not happen. And we were able to hold on to the Senate. And so that's what I lay out, and that's how I will deal with the question that you just asked me.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters in the White House briefing room. Back to the New York Times article on President Biden's re-election announcement. Mr. Biden tapped Julie Chavez Rodriguez, a senior White House advisor and granddaughter of the iconic labor leader Cesar Chavez, as his campaign manager. Quentin Folks, a Democratic operative who most recently ran Senator Raphael Warnock's 2022 re-election campaign in Georgia, will serve as her principal deputy. But the operation is expected to be overseen from the White House by top presidential aides. Also, the national co-chairs of the Joe Biden re-election campaign are Senators Chris Coons of Delaware and Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, House members Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware, Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, and Veronica Escobar of Texas, also Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and top Democratic donor Jeffrey Katzenberg. A story from Reuters about the Republican presidential field. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley said on Tuesday she was personally against abortion rights, but held no ill will for those who felt differently. in a rare foray by a Republican White House hopeful into one of the most sensitive issues of the 2024 election campaign. In a roughly 20-minute speech, Nikki Haley described the debate around abortion as an issue for each state to decide. While she would favor legislation restricting abortion rights at the federal level, she said that as a practical matter, Republicans were unlikely to win the majorities needed in Congress to impose their agenda. And for the time being, she said all Americans would need to work to establish a consensus on the issue. That from Reuters. C-SPAN covered Nikki Haley's speech. It was at the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America headquarters in Arlington, Virginia.
The next president must find national consensus. That might sound strange to many people. Under Roe, consensus was replaced by demonization. And let's be honest, most in the media prioritize demonization. They stoke division, pitting Americans against each other. No one talks about finding consensus. Everyone goes to the barricades and attacks the other side. They've turned a sensitive issue that has long divided people into a kind of gotcha bidding war. How many weeks are you for? How many exceptions are you for? And the list goes on. But these questions miss the point if the goal is about saving as many lives as possible. You don't save any lives if you can't enact your position into law. And you can't do that unless you find consensus. Reaching consensus starts with humanizing, not demonizing. Just like I have my story, I respect everyone who has their story. I don't judge someone who is pro-choice any more than I want them to judge me for being pro-life.
Nikki Haley, Republican presidential candidate, today in Arlington, Virginia, at the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America headquarters. Reuters article has this: she did not bring up the topic of abortion medication, which has become a hot topic after a federal judge limited the distribution of abortion pill mifepristone in April, a decision that the Supreme Court has put on hold. This is Washington Today. Some developments in the House Republican bill that would raise the nation's debt ceiling to avoid a default this year and also cut spending. The House Rules Committee meeting to set the conditions for House floor debate later this week, and President Biden officially issuing a veto threat. The bill under consideration would raise the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion, enough estimated to get through early next year, and also limit the growth of federal spending to 1% each year over the next decade, cancel the president's student loan forgiveness plan, rescind green energy tax credits, plus $90 billion in unspent COVID-19 relief. It would streamline energy project permitting laws and put in place work requirements for social welfare programs such as Medicaid and food stamps. The House Rules Committee Chair Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, opened the meeting in the committee room in the U.S. Capitol building on the bill that's officially titled Limit, Save, Grow Act.
The United States has a serious spending problem. Our national debt today exceeds 120% of our gross national product. More than $6 trillion of that debt has accrued in the last 2 years due to the fiscally reckless policies of President Biden and congressional Democrats. This out-of-control spending level is unsustainable. Given that more than 3 in 4 Americans feel that the national debt should be addressed, you'd hope that the President and congressional Democrats would focus on this pressing issue. Instead, his administration began with a partisan $1.9 trillion reconciliation package on top of money previously spent on the COVID pandemic and on top of our normal annual federal spending. President Biden and congressional Democrats then approved another partisan reconciliation bill with over $500 billion in new spending. And after that, President Biden tried to use executive orders to put forward an illegal and unconstitutional student loan cancellation scheme. If allowed to stand, it will add over $400 billion to our national debt. Spending, spending, and more spending has been the theme of the Biden presidency. We're already facing the ramifications of this spending spree. We have reached the statutory limit of our national debt, and the nation cannot borrow any more money without raising that limit. It's high time President Biden and congressional Democrats recognize the reality of the spending problem. We've been told for months that it's their way or the highway, that we must agree to lifting the debt limit without conditions and that they will not negotiate with Republicans on this. President Biden's position on this is stunningly irresponsible. We cannot keep doing what we've been doing and expect that everything will work out in the end. If we keep squandering money the way we have been, all we will leave behind for our children and our grandchildren is a mountain of debt, a broken economy, and a destroyed national currency. At least there are a few congressional Democrats that believe the president's position is untenable, urging the president to come to the table. Unfortunately, it is yet to change the president's mind as he continues to stonewall the speaker. Doing nothing is simply not an option, which is why we've put forward the Limit, Save, and Grow Act as a way to responsibly raise the debt limit. This legislation will accomplish three goals. We will limit future federal spending, we will save funds that are not necessary to spend, and we will grow the economy. And having put the nation on a more sustainable fiscal path, we will raise the debt ceiling through next spring. I want to remind my friends in the minority that there have been many occasions in the past where significant fiscal reforms were enacted on a bipartisan basis in tandem with increasing the debt limit. I believe we will ultimately do that again. We will take action to increase the debt limit and avoid a national default, and we will pass important fiscal reforms into law to put us on a more sustainable course. But we cannot do that until President Biden and congressional Democrats stop derailing consensus. The House taking up and passing the Limit, Save, and Grow Act is an important step forward in this process. We can take another step forward when President Biden stops refusing to entertain any reforms and agrees to sit down with Speaker McCarthy at the negotiating table.
Congressman Tom Cole, Republican from Oklahoma, chair of the Rules Committee at the committee meeting to set the rules for debate for the full House floor on this bill. That will include how much time there'll be for debate and also whether any amendments may be offered. The White House putting out today an SAP, Statement of Administration Policy, on this bill, calling it a reckless attempt to extract extreme concessions as a condition for the United States simply paying the bills it has already incurred. President Biden speaking more about this at the North America's Building Trades Unions Legislative Conference in Washington, D.C.
If they don't get their way, if Biden doesn't agree with them and agree to all the cuts and no these tax increases for others, working people, they're going to let the country default on its debt. This is a debt that took over 200 years to accumulate. The last administration alone increased the debt by nearly 40% in 4 years. And every single time, they passed the debt ceiling without any question. Default would be totally irresponsible. I mean, it would mean cuts in Social Security, Medicare, higher interest rates for your credit cards, car loans, mortgages. The entire economy would be put at risk. Moody's, you know, that economic operation that comments on the economy, they said the Republican plan would cost us 780,000 jobs. 780,000 jobs. Working and middle-class seniors paying the price. The speaker likes to quote President Reagan. I love these guys, how they selectively quote people, including makeup quotes for me. Well, President Reagan made it clear. We pay our debts. Here's his quote from him. He said, "The United States has a special responsibility to itself and to the world to meet its obligations. It means we have a well-earned reputation for reliability and credibility, two things that set us apart from much of the world." No, I think I'd be quoting Donald Trump, but even Donald Trump said, "I can't imagine anyone ever thinking of using the debt ceiling as a negotiating wedge." These guys are saying, unless I agree to cut all these programs by 22%, which is growing the economy, and cut taxes for the super wealthy and corporations. Folks, America's not a deadbeat nation. We pay our bills.
President Joe Biden at the North America's Building Trades Unions Legislative Conference today in Washington, D.C. Of the 435 voting members of the U.S. House of Representatives, Republicans have 222, Democrats have 213. 218 is a majority, so if all Democrats were to vote against this bill, combining the debt ceiling and spending cuts, that would mean a maximum of 4 Republicans could vote no and still have it pass. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida saying on his podcast Monday night that he wants to see more stringent work requirements for social welfare programs, or he won't vote for this.
One of the sticking points is that a pro-growth strategy that I'm demanding, work requirements to achieve various social services, well, the implementation on those is in some question. So here is the essence of the negotiation going on right now. The work requirements that I would prefer would be far more rigorous than 20 hours a week. The work requirements that I would demand would have to start in fiscal year 2024, not in 2025 or beyond. Because what I've seen after 7 years in Congress is that the things that we're serious about, we get going on those immediately. And the things that are unserious are delayed to some future budgetary year. So I'm not going to engage in a negotiation with Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden that is predicated on them getting their increase in the debt limit to fund their woke, weaponized government now, and then we get work requirements starting in 2025 or beyond. An essential element to get my vote for any increase in the debt limit, and by the way, I never have voted for an increase in the debt limit, would be work requirements starting in 2024, not 2025, as this legislation is currently written. And I also believe that the work requirements have to be more rigorous than just 20 hours a week.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, a video of his podcast Monday night. With more on the House Republican bill to raise the debt ceiling and cut federal spending, joining us on the phone is Aris Folley, Congressional Reporter with The Hill. Thank you very much for being here. I guess the only question to ask is, will House Republicans have enough votes to pass this bill?
I think they're still trying to figure that out, honestly. We know that they have to get, well, the goal is at least to shore up at least 218 votes, Republican votes, by the time they bring the bill to the floor. I think it's still unclear when House Republicans are planning to bring it to a chamber floor vote. I know that the House Rules Committee is going to be considering the bill later today. But there is still some resistance from Republicans who feel the bill doesn't go far enough, especially with regards to SNAP work requirements, and some who think it might go a little too far.
How many are in that group of fence sitters or people who are outright opposed?
I think the number is a little hard to lock down at this point. I mean, I do know that some people have kind of been on the fence. Like Tim Burchett, but we know that there have been some people also like Matt Gaetz and George Santos who have said if you don't increase these work requirements, they threaten to withhold support. So it really depends, I think, on what negotiations between these members and House leadership, depending on what stage they're in conversations right now, look like. I know that House leaders have been really resistant to making changes to the text. It makes sense. They could lose support from other Republicans, and it's really important that you don't lose the support that you've already been able to lock down. It looks like a chunk of this conference is still very supportive of the measure, so you do run the risk of potentially others maybe chipping off. I think that's the concern. Support if you make certain changes right now. And this is the product of months of brainstorming and workshopping ideas from the conference. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens this week.
You write that the vote this week will be the first real test of the nascent speakership of Kevin McCarthy. First real test, but how important is it to his continuing speakership?
I think that's up for debate. I mean, this is a major test, and I think a lot of members have a lot of support in the speaker. But I mean, I think McCarthy will be the first to acknowledge, it took him quite a few rounds to get here. I don't know if it would be completely out of the ordinary. Maybe it could take more than one round to pass this, or a little bit more time just to get this across the finish line. They have such a slim majority. So these coming days are going to be a trying set of days for leadership.
We're talking with Aris Folley, Congressional Reporter with The Hill. House Republicans say they want to get President Biden to the negotiating table over the debt ceiling combined with spending cuts, and this bill is a step in that direction. But the president has said he's not going to negotiate the two together. Where do things go from here, even if the bill passes?
I think it faces a very tough battle, and that is an understatement in the Senate. I think there have been a great many Democrats in both chambers who have come out pretty strongly against this bill for a number of reasons. There are a slew of proposals that are attached to the bill. I think the debt ceiling increase is only like a few pages at the end of this 320-page text designed to attract the overwhelming support from the GOP conference on the House side. So, I mean, I think a lot of Democrats probably see a chunk of these proposals as pretty dead on arrival. But I mean, whatever, if they are able to pass it, it would help show that Republicans are more unified in proposals to curb spending. And I think the hope is that this would help dial up pressure on Biden and Democrats to come to the bargaining table, which they haven't been really interested in. They've been insisting on a clean bill to raise the debt ceiling and pursuing bipartisan talks on the side on the budget. But the hope is that some Republicans, this would bring Biden to the table to negotiate a bipartisan compromise to raise the debt limit. That would also include certain fiscal reforms that draw support from Republicans.
You've written a story about an analysis of this House Republican bill and how it may affect the economy. What have you found?
Right. I know that economists at Moody's Analytics have raised concerns about the macroeconomic consequences the bill could potentially yield for the economy, while pointing to the effects that the proposed spending caps and just limiting growth to 1% annually over the next decade could have when taking into account GDP growth and also just contributing to the unemployment rate over the next 10 years. So there's a lot of concern about what type of effects and if this could raise the likelihood of an economic downturn in the analysis.
And finally, you've been up on the Hill covering this firsthand. It's been dominating the conversation. What story perhaps did you find related to this that has not made a headline but you found interesting?
I do think there's going to be a lot more interest in tax receipts. We just did a story today that's going to be coming out soon about April's tax receipts and how that could impact the debt limit timeline. It's still very early to tell, right? Tax season, we've seen a few big days this year, but there's still a lot more tax revenue to be collected. But there have been some economists who have been raising concerns about what impact the current performance with regards to tax receipts will have on potentially bringing up that timeline as close as sometime in June.
Aris Folley, Congressional Reporter with The Hill. Find her work at thehill.com and on Twitter at Aris Folley. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 344, NASDAQ down 238, S&P down 65. Washington today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN. Powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. The U.S. State Department says the 72-hour ceasefire, which started yesterday in Sudan between the rival generals, appears to be holding, although a New York Times article says it is on shaky ground as gunfire and loud explosions erupted in Khartoum, the capital, threatening continued efforts by thousands of people to flee a conflict that has ripped through Africa's third-largest nation for more than a week. The State Department also continuing to work with the estimated 16,000 Americans and dual nationals in Sudan to help them leave the country if they wish. But the Pentagon has said the security situation is too uncertain for a massive military airlift. At the State Department briefing today, a reporter asking spokesperson Vedant Patel if the U.S. missed any warning signs of the coming violence.
There's been a lot of criticism on social media about how the Western powers did not see this coming. I don't know if you've seen some of that criticism. There was one that was very striking, and I want to read a little bit. Quote, "You put us in this mess, now you're swooping in to take your kinfolk, leaving us behind to these two murdering psychopaths." I mean, is the U.S. doing any reflection on the past process, on what went wrong, and drawing some lessons for the future? What can be done differently? There's criticism that Western powers were not perhaps tough enough with the generals. Do you accept that?
Let me say a couple of things, Humaira. First, that over this past weekend, from communications that you've seen from the Secretary and others, we have been quite clear in saying that the Sudanese people are not giving up, and neither are we. And one of the key tenets of that is that this suspension of operations is temporary, and our commitment to the people of Sudan and our commitment of getting a ceasefire extended in hopes that it turns into a cessation of hostilities, in hopes that we can get back to a transitional government, those desires endure, and we're going to continue to work those lines of efforts unhindered. Specifically on the security situation, Humaira, we have also been very clear that the situation in Sudan has been delicate for quite some time, and it has been a very fluid and fraught security situation. It's been since August 2021 that Sudan was deemed a level 4 do not travel country, and so we have not been naive about the challenges that exist within the country as it relates to our own goals, but also the goals of the Sudanese people as well.
State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel with reporters today in the State Department briefing room. Great Britain is taking a different approach with its citizens in Sudan. The Royal Air Force sending in planes to fly British nationals out. The Guardian newspaper reports that United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says there would be many more flights out of Sudan on Wednesday as citizens make their way to the airfield. He told broadcasters, "We now have over 100 people on the ground in Sudan. The first flight has already left with British nationals. We'll have more flights this evening. We'll have many more into tomorrow." He said more than 1,000 people had been contacted and many were making their way to the airfield. The World Health Organization is warning of a huge biological risk after Sudanese fighters seized the National Public Health Laboratory in Khartoum, which contains samples of diseases and other biological materials. The WHO representative in Sudan, Dr. Nima Saeed Abid, held a news conference with reporters. He was in Sudan. They were at WHO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland.
I have received a phone call yesterday, unconfirmed this day, from the head of the Central Public Health Lab. It is occupied by one of the fighting parties, and they kicked out all the technicians from the lab. So now it is completely under the control of one of the fighting parties as a military base. And that is extremely, extremely dangerous because we have polio isolates in the lab, we have measles isolates on the lab, we have cholera isolates in the lab. So there is a huge biological risk associated with the occupation of the Central Public Health Lab in Khartoum by one of the fighting parties. I spoke about casualties, but really psychological trauma, mental health is extremely important. And we should not forget the public health risk associated with this fighting, because no water supply, no electricity, so definitely there is a high risk of cholera, and Khartoum itself was suffering or was witnessing the first ever dengue outbreak. Malaria is high in all the states of Sudan. Immunization now is zero, and we have outbreaks of measles in multiple states. So with the cessation of all response activities, the public health events and outbreaks which may not be reported will be also very high. So my expectation, unfortunately, that the people will die from the outbreaks if this continues for longer time will be much higher.
Dr. Nima Saeed Abid, the World Health Organization representative in Sudan, speaking to reporters in Geneva. That audio from the United Nations. The WHO estimates that the conflict in Sudan, just a week or two old, has killed at least 450 people and wounded 4,000 more. Today is the 75th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. Israel marking its independence with both official celebrations in the capital, Jerusalem, while thousands of protesters were in the streets in Tel Aviv, rallying against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial reform plan. The Prime Minister posting a video calling for unity.
Friends of Israel around the world, today we're celebrating 75 years of Israel's independence. What a transformation it's been to our people. 75 years ago, we emerged from the Holocaust, a wind-tossed people, scattered around the globe, decimated, annihilated by the worst evil in history. Yet today, Israel is a rising power among the world. It's a technological juggernaut, one that is esteemed by the nations around the world, one that is helping people around so many countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and elsewhere. We've become the example of how you build something seemingly from nothing. We do more with less. But it's not from nothing that we've built this. We've built this based on the age-old dream that we never gave up, to return to our homeland, to rebuild our national life, to be able to defend ourselves, to be able to create and forge a future of peace, not only for ourselves, but for others as well. And indeed, we've achieved peace, first with Egypt and Jordan, and most recently in the Abraham Accords with 4 other Arab states. I intend to lead the expansion of this peace to unimaginable heights. We have a brilliant future ahead of us. It is possible if we march towards it together, and we will do so, despite the differences, despite the robust arguments that you have in Israel's robust democracy. We will march forward together. Happy Independence Day, Israel.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeting that video. In Washington, D.C., the House of Representatives debating a resolution supporting the 75 years of U.S.-Israeli relations and also promoting the expansion of those Abraham Accords in which the U.S. mediated the normalization of relations between Israel and several of its Arab neighbors. On the House floor, Congresswoman Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina.
75 years ago, the State of Israel joined the community of nations when it declared its independence from the British Empire. In the wake of World War II and the Holocaust, for the first time in modern history, the Jews would have a land and a military of their own that would allow them to overcome centuries of anti-Semitism, persecution, and attempts at elimination. The State of Israel rests on land that has been uniquely bound to the Jewish people for thousands of years, from the Exodus from Egypt to the First and Second Temples, all the way to today's modern age. There has always been a Jewish presence between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Over the last 75 years, Israelis have made the desert bloom, transforming the country into a modern, industrialized democracy. Israel is a leader in technology, business, and agriculture. The country's innovative technologies have greatly benefited the United States military and other government agencies. And Israel shares the democratic and human rights values we treasure here in the United States. The recent Abraham Accords represent yet another milestone in Israel's development. Normalization of Israel's relationships with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco are already enhancing regional diplomacy, security, and communication, and will serve as an incubator for increased regional stability, prosperity, and peace. These agreements come on top of already realized peace agreements with Israel's neighbors, Egypt and Jordan, and demonstrate the power of diplomacy and compromise.
Congresswoman Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, on the House floor today. She is a member of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia on a resolution marking 75 years of U.S.-Israeli relations and also promoting the expansion of the Abraham Accords. The news site Haaretz reports that this House resolution excludes language on the Palestinians or the two-state solution. The article goes on, similar bipartisan resolutions containing standard boilerplate language and explicit references to the Palestinians and a desire to reach a two-state solution are introduced every 5 years to mark major anniversaries of Israel's Independence Day. The resolutions are an opportunity to affirm the U.S.-Israel relationship and usually garner significant bipartisan support. The current resolution's omissions reflect Israel's role as a wedge between the Republicans and Democrats, as well as Republicans' effective disavowal of a two-state solution. That from an article in Haaretz. This from USA Today. Harry Belafonte, the king of Calypso, became one of America's endearing and enduring civil rights activists. Into his 10th decade, has died. He was 96. Harry Belafonte died Tuesday at his home in New York of congestive heart failure, Representative Paul Witt said in a statement. Harry Belafonte will be remembered as one of the most popular entertainers of the 20th century, as a singer, musician, and actor, but his civil rights work in the 1960s and his anti-apartheid work in the 1980s will be just as endearing. That from USA Today. Harry Belafonte was on C-SPAN a number of times over the years. In 2010, right before Election Day, he spoke at the Lincoln Memorial at a rally hosted by the group One Nation Working Together.
We must awaken the apathetic, the cynical, the many angry doubters who see their future as the perpetual hopelessness, and show them that our greatest weapon is the vote, and it is the answer to much that nags at us. On November 2nd, in the millions, we must overburden our voting booths by voting against those who would see the nation become a totalitarian state. Americans know that Dr. King's dream is not dead. Let us vote on November 2nd for jobs, for jobs, for jobs, for peace, for justice, for human rights, for our children, and the future of America. And let us put an end to war. Peace is necessary for justice. It is necessary for hope. It is necessary for our future. I love you all, and God bless America.
Harry Belafonte, activist and entertainer at a political rally in 2010 in Washington, D.C., right before Election Day that year. Harry Belafonte has died at the age of 96. Number of elected officials in Washington paying their respects. Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland, tweeting, "A force for good left our earth today. A luminary in the arts and activism, Harry Belafonte was a civil rights icon who got into good trouble and walked the walk of caring for human rights and economic and social justice while utilizing the power of music and art to heal. May you rest in peace." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.